A really fun start to the college football season. We're on week 2, and I think we got to turn our attention to the Texas Longhorns a little bit. They were ranked number 1 going into the season, and rightfully so. I mean, I think they were probably outside of Penn State the most complete team going into the season. And when you look at Texas this year so far, obviously we could talk about the Ohio State game, and it was pretty obvious that just the nerves in general were pretty evident. I mean, I think going into this season, there were a lot of people, maybe not necessarily myself, but there were a lot of people going into the season saying, hey, Arch Manning is potentially a Heisman Trophy candidate. So to talk about Arch Manning as a Heisman Trophy candidate, knowing that he only had about 2 starts before that, definitely, definitely a pretty crazy take, needless to say, and definitely jumping to conclusions. But nevertheless, I mean, I think you give Arch Manning a lot of credit for bouncing back against San Jose State this week. They won the 38-7. And, Arch Manning is going to figure himself out, right? I think there were a lot of people last week who kind of overreact a little bit. But I think at the same time, when you look at, kind of his progression from last week to this week, I mean, just for a little bit of context from last week, Arch Manning finished the game against Ohio State with about 170 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And, also I want to give a testament to Ohio State too, as in their defense. Now, I've been critical on this show about Matt Patricia a little bit calling plays, but Ohio State's defense really did show up. So, I mean, a big credit to them too, because I mean, especially in this week, but I would say even this week and last week, there were definitely a couple moments where Arch Manning kind of missed some key throws, particularly just kind of a little bit slow getting into a rhythm too, because obviously it was a rough start at versus Ohio State, and I think the San Jose State game was really kind of just a really a good way to kind of get Arch Manning's feet truly wet. And when they get really into the SEC part of the schedule, I think Arch Manning's really going to find his confidence and really kind of find their rhythm too. Because I think one of the big takeaways from Texas last week is one of the things that Steve Sarkisian actually said in his press conference was just, hey, we're just going to play a lot more of just, complimentary type of football, in the sense that, I think there were at times where Texas was able to rely on their rushing attack a little bit more. Like, for example, CJ Baxter, who, I've praised on the show, and especially when I did my preview at Texas a while back. I mean, they had a couple key rushing drives, and, particularly in that second quarter too. And, the defense definitely stood up as well. So there's definitely a lot to be said about that as well, because I think in some ways, yes, you are going to have to help out Manning a little bit, because when I saw the beginning of the game, I was really curious to kind of see his first drive. And his first drive, he went 1 for 3, and he was trying to get to Ryan Wingo and really couldn't get into a rhythm. But now that I think his really a soft spot is Parker Livingstone, who's also his teammate. And he also threw for an 83-yard, his roommate, sorry, not his roommate and teammate. But nevertheless, he threw an 83-yard touchdown to him as well. So I think that connection is really going to kind of continue throughout the season. And also, too, it's important that Arch Manning is definitely an underrated guy in terms of his legs. And I don't think a lot of people kind of point that out. And I think as the season progresses, that's going to be really paramount for his progression as well. But I think you kind of have to find that balance, because you don't necessarily want him taking unnecessary hits. I'm not saying that happened this week versus San Jose State. I'm just saying in a general sort of way, hey, let's just try to avoid that as well, because there is still some moments where Arch Manning is going to have to learn how to, particularly, getting back to the fundamentals, particularly when he's under pressure, because there was an instance in the second quarter where he was under some pressure and he threw an interception when he was, really close to the end zone. I think it was somewhere in the, within the 20-yard mark. So, I mean, it's definitely a little bit concerning in that regard, because, this is kind of really the moment where, hey, it's okay to kind of make these mistakes, because yes, you're up by 20 or 30 points, but you're not going to be able to afford to make these mistakes when, you're playing the Georgias of the world, when you're playing the Alabamas of the world, when you're playing LSU, whoever any of those teams are. So I think in some ways it's really a positive that he's kind of making these mistakes now. But at the same time, I think these are things that some of these SEC defenses are going to try to take advantage of as we kind of progress, because I will give Arch Manning credit. He does look a lot more comfortable out there. He ended the game versus San Jose State with about just shy of 300 passing yards and 5 total touchdowns. So I'm really excited about that element of it. But again, I mean, I think the two big elephants in the room for Texas moving forward is going to be one, that rushing game really needs to be more consistent. I've even kind of exploited or talked about this last season. I really think you got to find a way to get this Texas running game going way better too, because Texas has a really solid offensive line too. So I just kind of don't want to hear excuses about that. I mean, CJ Baxter only had 64 rushing yards, only 155 yards total. And I think if you are going to help out your guy Arch Manning, you still kind of finding his way. You really got to find ways to be able to kind of have that balanced attack as much as possible and really try to take as much pressure off him as you can, because obviously he is the guy and he should be the guy, and that's great and everything. But any way you can kind of make that better for him is going to serve him better in the long term. And also, why I have the second too, I also want to talk about just kind of, Texas played a little bit undisciplined versus San Jose State and Ohio State last week and this week too, because there were definitely a couple moments where, they definitely made some pretty critical penalties. And, obviously because you're playing, a group of 5 school, it's not as big of a deal in the moment, but they had 12 penalties for 115 yards in that game too. And, you're not going to be able to make those same mistakes versus some better talent too, because I mean, they had 6 penalties for 60 yards on offense and also 4 penalties for 45 yards on defense too. And I think Texas is going to figure it out? Yeah, I think they're going to figure it out. I think Arch Manning is going to find his way. And I think in many ways also, I don't think a lot of people should really be too surprised that Arch Manning has had a couple hiccups along the way, because when you go into your first real start against one of the most hostile environments in the entire country at Ohio State, and for him to kind of walk into the game and say, you know what, we didn't get the win, but at the same time too, you did show a couple glimpses of what you can expect moving forward, and most importantly, we're seeing progression Arch Manning from week to week too. So I'm definitely kind of curious to see where he goes from here. And it's really good that he's kind of getting these starts now, because he still needs the time to settle into the role. He is going to figure it out. And I think he definitely has the potential to be a really great player for years to come for this Texas program. So to continue to watch out for Arch Manning's development, watch out for how Texas continues to try and utilize in my opinion, it has been a disappointing rushing attack. And most importantly, do they clean up the penalties for this team? Because I think if you go into later in the season and they have any sort of chance at making the college football playoff, I think that's definitely something that they're going to have to clean up, and just something that they're just going to have to keep putting on together. Now, granted, a lot of teams at the beginning of the season are going to have these sort of hiccups throughout the way, but I think there's definitely more that meets the eye in terms of this Texas team. But I think if you're a Texas fan out there, you should be excited.